Picture this, you're facing an army so vast, it takes 7 days and 7 nights just to march past a single point. 2 million men, they say. The largest military force the world has ever seen. You have 300 men. Logic says you're dead. History says you're heroes. But what if I told you there was a third option? What if this wasn't about courage alone, but about executing the most sophisticated military strategy ever conceived? 2,500 years ago, a Chinese general named Sun Tzu wrote, The Art of War, 13 principles that would become the foundation of all strategic thinking. Half a world away, 300 Spartan warriors were about to prove every single one of them. This is the story of how ancient Eastern wisdom met Western courage, and changed the course of civilization forever. In the kingdom of Wu, around 544 BC, a brilliant military strategist named Sun Tzu was compiling the ultimate guide to warfare. His work, The Art of War, would become the most influential military treatise in human history. Sun Tzu believed that the greatest victory was achieved not through brute force, but through superior strategy. Supreme excellence, he wrote, consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Meanwhile, in the mountains of Laconia, the Spartans were creating something unprecedented, a society built entirely around the art of war. Every citizen a soldier, every day a preparation for battle. These two cultures never met. Sun Tzu died decades before the events at Thermopylae. Yet what happened in 480 BC would prove that great strategic minds think alike, regardless of time or distance. Today, we're going to analyze the most famous last stand in history through the lens of the world's greatest strategic mind. We'll discover that what looked like hopeless courage was actually tactical genius of the highest order. Sun Tzu's first principle, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. To understand Thermopylae, we must first understand the Persian Empire, the greatest military machine the ancient world had ever seen. Xerxes I, King of Kings, ruler of the Persian Empire. His domain stretched from the Indus River to the gates of Europe. Over 20 million people called him master. But Xerxes had a problem. 10 years earlier, his father Darius had suffered a humiliating defeat at Marathon. 6,400 Persians dead, only 192 Greeks. The most powerful empire on earth had been embarrassed by a collection of Greek city-states. Xerxes would not repeat his father's mistake. This time, he would bring such overwhelming force that resistance would be impossible. Sun Tzu warned against such thinking. The clever combatant looks to the effect of combined energy, and does not require too much from individuals. The numbers were staggering. Modern historians estimate Xerxes' invasion force at 200,000 to 300,000 men. Herodotus claimed it was over 2 million. Whatever the exact figure, it was the largest military expedition in ancient history. The Immortals, Xerxes' elite guard, always maintained at exactly 10,000 men. Cavalry from the steppes of Central Asia. Archers from Ethiopia. War elephants from India. Engineers who could bridge the Hellespont and dig canals through peninsulas. But Sun Tzu taught that large armies have large vulnerabilities. Rapidity is the essence of war, he wrote. This massive force moved like a glacier, slow, predictable, consuming everything in its path. Every day, this army consumed tons of food, thousands of gallons of water. Its supply lines stretched back to Asia. It needed to live off the land, which meant it needed to keep moving forward. Xerxes had created not just an army, but a devouring monster that couldn't stop. Against this juggernaut stood Greece, not a nation, but a collection of fiercely independent city-states. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each with its own agenda, its own way of war. Sun Tzu wrote, "All warfare is based on deception." The Persians saw Greek disunity as weakness. They were about to learn it was strength. Sun Tzu devoted an entire chapter to terrain, calling it, the soldier's strength. He identified 6 types of ground, each requiring different tactics. Thermopylae combined 3 of them, narrow ground, difficult ground, and encircled ground. The hot gates, Thermopylae in Greek, sat between mountain and sea. In 480 BC, the pass was even narrower than today. At its tightest point, perhaps 20 feet wide. Wide enough for a cart, narrow enough for strategy. When the Greek council met to decide where to make their stand, many favored the Isthmus of Corinth, a strong position that would protect central Greece. Leonidas disagreed. He understood something they didn't. Sun Tzu taught, the clever combatant looks to the effect of combined energy. At Corinth, the Greeks would fight on Persian terms, large formations, cavalry charges, archery duels. At Thermopylae, they could dictate the terms of engagement. In the narrow pass, Persian numbers became meaningless. They couldn't outflank, couldn't maneuver, couldn't use their cavalry. Their archers had no clear shots. Most importantly, they couldn't use their overwhelming advantage, the ability to attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Imagine you're a Persian commander. You have 50,000 infantry, but you can only get 10 men at a time to the front. Your cavalry is useless. Your archers are shooting into their own men. Your numerical advantage has become a logistical nightmare. The Spartans, meanwhile, had turned the pass into a fortress. They rebuilt an ancient wall, creating a bottleneck within a bottleneck. Behind it, they could rest, rotate, and prepare while the Persians exhausted themselves in futile attacks. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme excellence in war is to attack the enemy's plans." Leonidas did exactly that. By choosing Thermopylae, he had attacked Xerxes' entire strategic concept. Xerxes had planned to overwhelm Greece with speed and terror. One decisive battle, maximum shock value, then accept surrenders as his army swept south. Instead, he found himself trapped in a grinding siege against an enemy that refused to be intimidated. Every day at Thermopylae was a victory for Greece. While Xerxes threw away men and morale, the Greek fleet was moving into position at Salamis. The rest of Greece was mobilizing. Time, Sun Tzu knew, was often more valuable than territory. Winter was coming. The Persian army couldn't campaign in Greek mountains during the cold months. They needed to finish this war before the weather turned. Leonidas had weaponized time itself. Sun Tzu devoted significant attention to psychological warfare. The supreme art of war, he wrote, is to subdue the enemy without fighting. At Thermopylae, the battle for minds began long before the battle for ground. Xerxes was a master of psychological pressure. He would arrive at enemy cities with his massive army, display his wealth and power, then offer generous terms for surrender. Most enemies capitulated without a fight. The Persians were experts at spreading fear. They would parade their exotic troops, war elephants, camel cavalry, warriors from dozens of different nations. The message was clear: resistance is futile, surrender is profitable. When Xerxes demanded the Spartans surrender their weapons, Leonidas replied with 2 words, "Molon labe, come and take them." This wasn't just defiance, it was strategic communication. Sun Tzu taught that confidence is contagious. Every act of Spartan courage sent ripples through both armies. When Dionysus was told that Persian arrows would block out the sun, he replied, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade." The Spartans turned their pre-battle rituals into psychological weapons. They combed their hair, oiled their bodies, sharpened their weapons in full view of the enemy. These weren't desperate men preparing to die, these were professionals preparing to work. Persian soldiers, many of whom had been conscripted from across the empire, watched in confusion. They had expected to find terrified Greeks begging for mercy. Instead, they found men who seemed to welcome death. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme excellence in war is to attack the enemy's plans." The Spartan reputation was itself a weapon. Every Persian soldier had heard the stories: Spartans never retreat, never surrender, fight to the last man. This reputation wasn't accidental. Spartan society had spent centuries building it. From childhood, Spartan boys were taught that death in battle was the highest honor. Their mothers would tell them, "Come back with your shield, or on it." Even Spartan women participated in this psychological warfare. When Leonidas left for Thermopylae, his wife Gorgo asked what she should do. "Marry a good man and bear good children," he replied. Both understood he wasn't coming back. As the battle dragged on, Persian morale began to crack. These were men who had joined the army for plunder and glory, not for a grinding siege against fanatics. Desertion became a problem. Units began to refuse orders. Xerxes, watching from his golden throne, began to understand the trap he was in. Every day he spent at Thermopylae, his aura of invincibility dimmed. The King of Kings was being humiliated by 300 men. Sun Tzu taught that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning, but from refusing to lose. News of Spartan resistance spread throughout Greece. If 300 Spartans could hold off the great king, what could all of Greece do together? The psychological impact extended far beyond the battlefield. Greek city-states that had been considering surrender began to reconsider. The Spartan stand was becoming a rallying cry for all of Greece. Persian soldiers, accustomed to fighting as individuals, couldn't adapt to this collective warfare. They would break through the Spartan line only to find themselves surrounded, isolated, overwhelmed by warriors who fought like wolves, coordinated, relentless, deadly. Sun Tzu taught the importance of preserving your forces. The skillful strategist defeats the enemy without any fighting. The Spartans had learned this lesson. They fought in shifts, rotating fresh men to the front while the exhausted rested. The Persians, meanwhile, were throwing their best troops into a meat grinder. Wave after wave of attacks, each one ending in failure and death. Their elite immortals, supposedly invincible, were being slaughtered by Greek farmers and blacksmiths. As the battle continued, the Persian army began to understand what they were facing. These weren't just soldiers, they were artists of war, craftsmen of death, professionals at the peak of their abilities. Xerxes, watching his army die against the Spartan wall, began to understand the trap he was in. He couldn't retreat, his reputation as an invincible king would be shattered. But he couldn't advance either. The narrow pass had become a tomb for his empire's prestige. Sun Tzu wrote, "He who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy who is not, will be victorious." But he also knew that sometimes, the greatest victory requires the ultimate sacrifice. Ephialtes, a local Greek seeking Persian gold, revealed the existence of the Anapeia path, a mountain trail that would allow the Persians to outflank the Spartan position. For the first time in 3 days, Xerxes smiled. The immortals, led by Hydarnes, began their night march around the mountain. By dawn, they would be behind the Spartan position. The tactical situation that had favored the Greeks was about to be reversed. When Leonidas learned of the flanking movement, he faced the ultimate strategic decision. He could retreat, preserving his men but abandoning the pass. Or he could stay, knowing it meant certain death. Sun Tzu taught that great commanders must think beyond the immediate battle. The supreme excellence in war is to attack the enemy's plans. Leonidas was about to prove this principle in the most profound way possible. Leonidas dismissed most of his allies, sending them south to join the main Greek army. But he and his 300 Spartans remained, along with 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans. They would make their final stand. This wasn't a meaningless gesture of defiance. Every hour the Spartans held the pass was an hour for the Greek fleet to position itself at Salamis. Every Persian soldier who died at Thermopylae was one less to fight at Plataea. When the final assault began, the Persians found themselves fighting not just for victory, but for survival. The Spartans, knowing they were doomed, fought with a fury that terrified their enemies. They were no longer trying to win, they were trying to cost the Persians as much as possible. The battle raged for hours. Spartans fought with broken spears, then swords, then bare hands. Leonidas himself fell, and the battle became a struggle for his body. Finally, overwhelmed by numbers and arrows, the last Spartan died. Xerxes had won Thermopylae, but at a catastrophic cost. His army was demoralized, his timetable destroyed, his aura of invincibility shattered. The easy conquest of Greece had become a nightmare of attrition. Sun Tzu wrote, he who knows when to fight and when not to fight will be victorious. The Spartans had fought when fighting was hopeless, but in doing so, they had given Greece the gift of time. While the Spartans died at Thermopylae, the Greek fleet was moving into position at Salamis. The Athenians were evacuating their city. The Peloponnesian League was mobilizing. Greece was transforming from a collection of city-states into a unified war machine. More importantly, the Spartans had proved that Persians could be beaten. The great king's army could be stopped, his immortals could die, his plans could be thwarted. The myth of Persian invincibility was dead. Sun Tzu's Art of War has influenced military leaders for over 2 millennia. From Napoleon to MacArthur, from boardrooms to battlefields, his principles remain relevant because they understand a fundamental truth: victory comes not from strength alone, but from superior strategy. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae proved every one of Sun Tzu's principles. They knew their enemy and themselves. They chose the perfect terrain. They used psychological warfare. They fought with discipline and unity. And ultimately, they achieved victory through sacrifice. 6 months later, the Persian fleet was destroyed at Salamis. A year later, their army was crushed at Plataea. Xerxes returned to Persia a broken man, his dreams of European conquest shattered forever. If the Persians had conquered Greece, there would have been no golden age of Athens, no philosophy of Plato, no democracy, no Alexander the Great. Western civilization as we know it was saved by 300 men who understood that sometimes, the greatest victory comes through the ultimate sacrifice. The lessons of Thermopylae echo through time. In business, in sports, in life, we face our own impossible odds. We must choose our battles carefully, use our strengths wisely, and never underestimate the power of preparation and determination. Sun Tzu taught that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. But he also knew that sometimes, the greatest victory requires the greatest sacrifice. The Spartans at Thermopylae understood both lessons. They died as they had lived, following orders, protecting their homeland, proving that courage and strategy, combined with sacrifice, can overcome any odds. In the end, they achieved something greater than victory: they achieved immortality.